Right, hi everybody. Can everybody hear me?
Yes, Carl, thank you so much for joining, and thank you so much, everyone, for joining myself and Carl. My name is Anna, and I am the VP of UK Plastics Research Collaborative. Welcome to our first webinar to help you guys apply to core surgical training. So we'll just give 5 minutes for everyone to come in, and then Carl will take it away and share.
Cool. Thanks, Anna. I'll wait and then we can start when there's a few more.
Carl, just so you know, we're able to see the whole screen that you're sharing rather than the slideshow. So I don't know if you want to maximize or.
Yeah, I'll switch it. I'm just waiting in case any more people join, but I'm going to switch to the slides and then we can maximize it. I think we're probably ready now. It looks like it's plateaued. Fine. Okay, I'm going to make a start, guys. Let me know if you can't hear me well or if there's any questions. I assume you guys actually can't unmute yourselves on here, but you can just drop something in the chat. Or if you can unmute yourselves, unmute yourselves. So let me go on to the slideshow. Fine. So can everyone see the slides? I'm gonna take it as a yes. Anna, let me know if there's anything that comes up, if there's any problems. So I'm going to give a quick talk on preparing for the MSRA. It's one part of the Preparing for CST series, and it's an important part, but also a small part. And I'm going to keep it relatively brief. So we're just going to focus on the key bits. What is the MSRA? What are the things you can do for it? And how is it important for CST? So I've split it up into pretty much these 4 points. Point 1 is just going to be a brief overview, just summarizing what you might already know. 2 is why is it relevant? And there's 2 parts to it. One is it gets you to the interview. And the second part is it actually counts towards your overall score as well. And we're just going to discuss what the importance of each of those is. Third part is going to be preparation, just some tips and advice. And then I'm just going to share my experience because I think sometimes that's the most insightful in these circumstances. So on the right, I've just summarized again the 3 components for your core surgical training application. One is the MSRA, the second bit is going to be the portfolio, and the third is going to be the interview. On the right in the brackets, what I've put is actually how much it contributes to the overall score that you get at the end. And at the end, once you've passed the MSRA, if you get to interview, you have the interview, and then you've had your portfolio validated, you're going to get a composite score, which is basically 10% MSRA, 30% portfolio, and 60% interview. And they compute it all together, give you a number, and then rank you with all the other candidates. So that is basically the rough summary. The MSRA has a special role, obviously, because it gets you to the interview. So it's important, and it's kind of the most important bit to focus on for now. The MSRA stands for Multi-Specialty Recruitment Assessment. It's computer-based, so you're going to go to a test center at some point early January, and it's usually a Pearson test center, and you spend kind of the morning or afternoon there, and you get you click your way through. It's pretty straightforward, and it's split into 2 parts. So the first part is the professional dilemmas, and the second part is the clinical problem solving. They are equally weighted, so they count for 50% each. The professional dilemmas has got 50 items, whereas the clinical problem solving has got 97. Anyway, so all interesting things that you can actually just look up and you probably know yourself. From my point of view, I think the 2 things to stress are they are quite different exam papers, the professional dilemmas and the clinical problem solving. The professional dilemmas, you've got a bit more time for your questions, so you've got almost 2 minutes to think it through and answer it, whereas the clinical problem solving is much more rapid fire. So you can see you've got about 46 seconds per question, which is actually less than you get for most med school exams. So it's a bit more fast paced and you really have to push to get through everything in the time. So those are my 2 take homes. The other thing that's important for this exam is the clinical problem solving is one that you can prepare for a bit more reliably, just because it's a bit more multiple choice focused. So you can actually have a right and a wrong answer, and I think you can actually feel your progress. Whereas the professional dilemmas is a bit more difficult because there's some nuance, and there's not always a logic that carries over from one exam to the next. We'll do some practice questions in a minute, and then you guys can see how you feel about it. I don't know what the timeline is going to be yet for this cycle. They release it a bit later once they start releasing your actual application windows and Oriel, so you can actually apply for the program. In terms of what we had last year, and I think that's a good thing to go off, the test window was January 4th to 16th, and you just had to select the time and book it in at some point in December. The weird thing, like all of the, I feel like NHS recruitment things, is it's a bit random. So they will email you at some day in December, but I remember you sometimes know the day, but you're not exactly sure of the time, and they will release the slots. And then you have to book yourself in pretty quickly. What else do I remember about that? I also remember that you book in the slots, you don't quite know what time it comes out. So it's good to have like a group chat, maybe where you let each other know when it's going to come out. And sometimes not all of the test slots come out at the same time. So if they release the first batch at like 9 a.m., sometimes they release the next batch at 11 a.m. So just be mindful that you can rebook your test slot, but I think you have to cancel the existing one. Anyway, so the long and short of it is you have to book it in December. They don't tell you when it's going to be released. You just have to be kind of on it with your friends. And then you just have to pick the best time and location. The main thing is location for you to take it. Good, so you take it at some point in that test window. I don't think it makes a huge difference. When you take it, just get it done. Yeah. The results, you're going to get them at some point in February, early February. And on the same day you get the results or your score, you also figure out if you've gotten an interview or not. Sometimes it turns green and tells you if you've got the interview before you actually know about the result. Good. So on the right, I've put a little rubric of what they've got from the test site, which is actually how they score your exam. So in GP programs and other programs that use the MSRA as well, they actually give you the split score. So on oral, you'll get a result for the clinical problem solving test and you'll get one for the professional dilemmas. And based on it, you can actually figure out how well you did in each. If you only apply to core surgical training, you just get the total result. So that's what I did, and I got my total result at the end of it. So I couldn't actually figure out how well I did in each of them. It doesn't matter, but I did have friends who'd also applied to GP, for example, and they actually had that breakdown. The composite score you're going to get is going to be those two scores put together. Each one of those scores is scaled on a bell curve, and 250 looks to be roughly the average. So if you get 250, you're going to be in the top 48% of candidates roughly. And you can see that roughly here in this chart that I've marked it. So that's pretty much what we can take away from it. If you get something above 310, and if you manage to do that in both exams, that would give you a score of something like 620 total. You are in the real, if you got it in both exams, you must be in the top 1% because it doesn't really score. It doesn't add. It's not sort of a summative thing. So bearing in mind the score range is 600 would be an amazing score. If you got 500, that's sort of 2 times an average score. Yeah. What does this actually mean for you guys? So I've told you what the exam is like, what the structure is going to be. It's a progression to interview. So that's really important. It's actually the most important part of your application in a way, because you could be great at interviews and you could be have the best portfolio, but you're not going to be able to make that count if you don't progress. Progression. They have a fixed number of interview slots. It's about 1,200, but I'm sure they'll change it a bit if there was suddenly a lot more applicants. And in terms of applicant numbers, I think there was about 2,400, 2,500 that applied last year. That basically means that about half the people that apply are going to get an interview. That means for you to get an interview, you have to score above average as the sum score compared to the average CST applicant. That doesn't mean it's going to be, and so that depends a bit on what the average CST applicant is like. Having looked at Reddit, the score for last cycle was about 531. So that was the cutoff score. It means that you've basically scored above average significantly in one paper or a bit above average in both, which makes sense. The second thing it's going to have an impact on is your overall score for CST. So this is the score that they add together with the portfolio and the interview to give you the total score. They scale whatever score you've got, this 531, or whatever number you've got, they're going to scale it and they're going to put it into something between 1 and 10, and it's going to come to your total score. It doesn't make a huge difference. I'm basing that off my experience, which I'll tell you about in a bit, and also that of my friends. Some people with a lower score, the scale score doesn't seem to vary a huge amount. The long and short of it is, if you have a score that's high enough to get you to interview, it's probably not going to make a huge difference for your overall score. Good. So I'm just going to pause there quickly. Does anybody have any questions? Let me see, I can actually see it. In the chat, yes, okay. Nothing. Good, I'll carry on then. So good. So the summary of those 2 points was 2 parts of the exam. It's really important that you try and get an above average score compared to the other CST applicants, which is a tricky ask because it means it's not about how good you are overall, it's about having to be a bit better than your peers, which is always a bit of a tricky one to be in because it makes it, it makes it a competitive exam at the end of the day. What can you do for it? I think preparation-wise, I've got 2 tips. PassMed, they've got a brilliant question bank, and you can use that for all of the clinical knowledge pretty much. You've got a couple of thousand questions, and if you've got the time to go through it and just think about the questions, you'll be pretty well prepared. The second thing is going to be some of the past papers they have online for the MSRA. And they are good to just get you into the flavor of what is it going to be like on test day. So I'd save those for a bit later, and I'd start with PassMed, but they're actually pretty good. And you can literally just find that by Googling HEE and then MSRA past papers or practice exams. The ones they're particularly good for is the professional dilemmas, because they have a very particular way of phrasing these professional dilemmas. And I think the values that they assign to some of the questions, they're very specific to some of the people that are writing it. And you can see that best on these online past papers. Good. So those are things I think you do need to prepare well. What do you not need to prepare so well for? So I'm going to show you some past paper questions in a second. In my experience, I've taken a lot of exams. Just realized I didn't actually guys tell you about my background, but I'm starting CT1 in plastic surgery themed in London. I got my second choice for CST, so it went well for me. I graduated from Cambridge, and I've also done the USMLEs, and I've done the MRCS A and B and MRCP Part 1. So I've done a lot of exams basically, and can kind of have a bit of judgment about what kind of an exam this is in terms of how does it fit in terms of difficulty, in needs of preparation. The clinical problem solving part is easy. The questions are super simplistic. There's almost nothing in terms of actual problem solving that you have to do. You basically get single step questions and answers. You'll see that as you start practicing for it. So it's not like some of the other exams you might have had in med school where you've got complicated things, you have to solve something, you have to do some maths, there's multiple steps, you have to be really thinking on your feet. There's none of that. So I think the moral is you really have to try and get through as many questions as possible, because it's examining the breadth of your knowledge and not necessarily very complicated depth, if that makes sense. If you think about it, when they designed this exam, it was originally for GPs and people applying to that sort of specialty group. So there's actually a lot of questions that are themed in that sort of way. That's what I wanted to say about preparation. Let's do some questions. So we're going to start with some of the professional dilemma ones. Just to get you in the flavor, I'll give you, let's say, like a minute, just read through it, and then just think to yourself, what is the sequence that I might rank these in? And this is one of the two styles of questions they've got for professional dilemmas. This style is a ranking style. So you've got 5 options, and you have to rank them from most to least appropriate. I'm going to go through the second style in the next slide. And if anybody wants to, you can. I'm going to minimize this again in a second just so I can see the chat. And if you want to put a suggestion into the chat, you're more than welcome to. Okay. And this poll, it might be tricky with the poll because it's going to be a ranking. Fine. So yeah, we'll think through it quickly. So I hope everyone's had a chance to look at it. It's basically, yeah, it's a question surrounding basically how you approach a patient who's a bit dissatisfied with their care and how you'd approach it. With all of these questions, there's a basic logic to it, which is generally exploring opinions and exploring ideas is the most appropriate thing to do. The least appropriate thing to do is to be rude or go straight towards complaint. So the answer option they've gone for here is CADBE. C because it's actually exploring the concerns and is the best option. E is actually dismissing kind of the concern that she's got by not solving it, and you're actually directing towards complaint. We all know it's not really something that the ENT consultant has say over. It's kind of a national policy, so it would be a bit inappropriate to shove them under the bus. So that's why it's the least appropriate. And then the middle ones, A, D, and B. A is good because you're explaining, which is she's kind of raised it as a concern, but you're not exploring if there's anything additional. And then it's between D and B. And these ones start to get a bit trickier because it's sort of like, you're referring her for a second opinion. Do you suggest it to discuss with her usual GP when you can actually just discuss it yourself? Yeah, it makes sense. It's not appropriate for them to have the tonsillectomy, so that's why you wouldn't refer for a second opinion. That's why it's the second to last option. The tricky thing that you're going to have with these professional dilemma questions, and why it's hard to get 100% ever, is that sometimes the options, they're not always in a hierarchy. So referring for a second opinion and suggesting that she makes an appointment with her usual GP, they're kind of different strategies. They're both a bit wrong, and it's a bit weird to sort of weigh up what's more or what's less wrong. So yeah, these are tricky. If you go through PassMed and if you go through the past papers, try and pick out the basic principles. So for example, you'll find that there's certain principles about escalation. You go to your senior, you go to your registrar, then your consultant, then maybe to the manager. Does that make sense? Just try and pick those patterns out and learn them, and that's going to set you up the best for this part. Let's try this one here. This one here is the second style of question. Here you get a list of options and you have to select the 3 most appropriate actions to take in a situation. This one's a bit different also because for the other one, you're ranking it. So they're like individual events and you're thinking this is the best, this is the second best. Here, you can almost think of them a bit in combination, not quite, but the explanation sometimes it alludes to the fact that you could be doing these 3 things. You're picking 3 things to do. Give you guys a bit more time to read about it, 30 seconds, let's say. Okay, that's probably enough time to have had some thoughts about it. So again, patient is a bit unhappy with how they've been treated. The answers here are C, D, and G. Generally, D, C, always good. Exploring how the patient feels, especially when they're unhappy, is in these situations always a good one. They seem to always default to this one. The second one is tell them that you're feeling sorry they're feeling this way. It's nice, it's empathic. And then I was also struggling a bit thinking about what the third one would be. In this case, it's asking Mr. Davies what he'd like you to do. It probably makes the most sense because actually the other ones, the way that they're phrased, they're a bit off. H, for example, you're trying to reassure them because you know the registrar, but actually you weren't there in that situation and you don't know exactly what happened. So it's tricky for you to reassure somebody when you weren't there. The advisor with the consultant doesn't really make sense because they're speaking to you about it, and you'd be kind of, it's wasting a consultant's time at the end of the day. B is missing the point. Somebody's unhappy, and to share your opinion about how great you think they are, it's probably not going to help. Nobody wants to hear that. E, bit heavy-handed, formal complaints when you haven't tried to resolve it locally within your powers. And then F is, at the end of the day, making an excuse. So G, although it doesn't seem completely optimal because you're a bit like, what do you want to do? It's probably the best option that we've got here. Good. We're going to do one from the clinical problem solving now. So give this one a read. The thing that you'll probably find with this question is it's very simple, and they're all like this. They're one-step questions, and you'll read it and you either know or you don't. Give you another 10 seconds. Right, so the answer is simple. It's ciprofloxacin. I'm sure you guys all knew that. Fluoroquinolones, they can cause tendon rupture, especially if they're taken with steroids. That increases the risk. This is as hard as it gets in this exam. So the other thing you'll find is the questions, they're very trivia-like questions. So it's usually those side effects that you've seen in med school at some point before. Ciprofloxacin obviously actually has lots of other side effects. They're very rarely examined. Like you're never going to get something completely out of the ordinary because they're just very trivia-like questions. So stick to pass med, go through that, and I think you'll be in safe hands. Sometimes then they change the stem and they keep the answers the same. So this is an example of a follow-on question. You could sort of pretend it's a two-step question, but actually if you've done these enough, side effects, acne, antibiotic. How many antibiotics do we use to treat acne? Not that many. And on this list, pretty much none. So there's one that stands out, and that's the tetracycline, which gives you sun sensitivity. So the answer to this is minocycline. Go through it again, and you'll quickly get the hang of it. We'll do one more, and this one I chose, I'll tell you in a second, because it highlights one of the difficulties of this exam, which is sometimes actually it's not that you have so much problem solving to do, as rather the information they're giving you is really brief. And it's, in real life, you'd never make a diagnosis on, 3 bullet points. But here we are, that's the exam. So we're thinking it through. So 63, difficult to turn over in bed, needs help to do up his shirt buttons. There's not a lot to go on here, but you've got a few. You've got some epidemiology. 63, male, difficulty turning and shirt buttons. What's the most likely? It's slowness, it's bradykinesia, maybe a bit of rigidity, but basically bradykinesia, and that's kind of one of the key diagnostic markers of Parkinson's disease. So that would be Parkinson's disease. I think that's one of the things you're going to have to get used to with this exam is sometimes it forces you to make a diagnosis on really limited information. And so you just have to be well versed with that med school trivia stuff, which is what do these 3 bullet points mean? Another classic is, you're having a hot bath and they are flushed. They get flushed red after having a hot bath, and you're looking for a hematological condition, and it's, polycythemia vera. It's not common, and it would be more, if it was a real problem solving, you might just put like a blood count and you could do something that's actually difficult, but they don't do that. They just do these trigger words and then make the diagnosis. Cool. So I'll tell you now what my experience is. So I got my second choice for CST, and it was a London program. I told you, so about 2,400 people apply. You have to get that threshold score to get to interview. That's about 1,200 people. Everybody then gets their portfolio score validated, which we'll talk about in a different session. But basically, you have to get that validation, that logbook ready. And that is challenging, and you have to do it long in advance because you have to submit it just after you know if you're going to go to interview or not. So MSRA fits in at the start, and then the interview score is actually what makes the biggest difference to your performance. The weird thing is you then have to rank all the programs, and you only find out the result of your interview and the sort of overall score at on sort of results day. So yeah, it was always a bit sort of a shock to figure out what program am I going to get, what rank have I actually got. I put my score here, so I got 585. So you remember the cutoff was about 531. The average for one section will be 250. That's sort of 50% or better, 50% or worse. To get something like 600, it's not as simple as saying you were, top 25% in both papers, because people don't score the same percentile in each paper. So what I'm trying to say is a score like 600 is pretty rare. Like, I know next to nobody who got one. Some people do, they get a 600 and a bit above. It doesn't make a huge difference to your scaled scores. So I have a friend who's got 554 scaled to 4.5, and mine scaled to 6.4. That's 2 points. That's compared to sort of an interview, that's like 1 or 2 points in the interview. So just bear that in mind. To give you context as well, my friend who got that score got a London themed plastics training post as well. My flatmate who topped the year in CST, or came first for CST, got pretty much the same score as me. It was 587 or 590, but it wasn't much more. So the long and short of it is, the person who got the top of the year didn't need to have the top CST score. So I think just bear that in mind. The CST score, the MSRA score, sorry, is really to get you to the interview stage, and then you can prove yourself. Good performance, yeah, based on breadth rather than depth. What else would I say? Everybody knows how to prepare for exams themselves. You've done a lot of exams. Think back, how do you normally do? Are you normally a lot below average? Are you normally above average? Use that as your basis point. I've done a lot of exams. I know I'm normally above average, so it's unlikely I'm going to suddenly be below average because it's the same stuff again and again and again. Bear that in mind when you're making a training plan, because you want to think about where did you sit before and where do you want to come now? And that might dictate a bit how much time and effort you're going to expend. For me, for example, I'd done the USMLEs before. I felt quite prepped with my detailed knowledge, but I still needed this sort of NHS GP breadth of knowledge. So I did do pass med quite a bit before. I don't think I even went through one whole cycle, but my flatmate and somebody else, they went through, 2 times they went through the question bank. There's no sort of right and wrong. What else have I got for a tip? I think there was something on the description that said group sessions. You can use them for the professional dilemmas, and I think it's good to sometimes talk it through because they're so silly sometimes, the answers. It's nice to just have somebody to be who agrees with you and is this is just the most annoying answer key. It doesn't make sense. Yeah, that's sort of what I would recommend. I think for the clinical problem solving, it doesn't make a huge difference. I think just try and get as much done as you can. The peer-to-peer group is really useful for the rest of the application process to guide you through how to submit your evidence for interview, for portfolio, and to prepare for the interview. Yes, so I think that's it. I think there's no one model that fits all. I think if you can get to the interview, you can kind of relax about the MSRA. And I think the key thing is, yeah, just try your absolute best to get past that threshold stage. Yeah. And the only other thing I'd say about CST is, obviously a lot of people apply. There's a lot of multiple stages. They're quite time consuming and tiring. And then at the end of the day, the outcome you get is still has an element of randomness. So don't be, whatever happens, don't be disheartened. And, it's more important. Think about also, whilst you're doing CST, also just plan in your mind, what's important to me, where do I want to be, where do I want to work, and just think about some like JCF applications in parallel. That is the end of my wisdom, because there's not much more to say about MSRA. So do you guys have any questions? And if so, just shoot them my way. I'm going to stop sharing. That's good. Okay, so I've got a question. So what was the most challenging, unexpected about the exam? The time pressure. So I didn't think the time pressure on the clinical problem questions was a lot, because as you probably could tell when you were doing them, you know it or you don't know it. The only thing you have to be disciplined with is, if you don't know it, just flag it and come back at the end. But you only have 45 seconds. So don't spend a lot of time. If you don't know, just flag it and then come back. I personally, if I actually had enough time, I think, to loop through and do it again. So I answered everything in the clinical problem solving, and then had enough time to go through all of the flagged ones, because it was quite quick. Time pressure, and then what was challenging about it? I think the professional dilemmas is the most challenging, because they are so random. Like, you will walk out and you've got absolutely no clue. You'll have absolutely no clue, how that went. How to build an e-logbook for non-UK grads. It's tricky. I mean, if you're working in the UK, I guess non-UK grads and not working in the UK, that I don't know. I don't know if you can get e-logbook and you can add your cases as you would in the UK. That's something I'm not actually familiar with. I think if you're in the UK, you can build it, I think, just like as a regular UK grad. Yeah. If you can get in other countries, and every time you do an operation, you just have to add what you're doing, bearing in mind the procedures that count for your portfolio are ones that you are assisting in, not just observing. So assisting is literally just you're scrubbing, you're suturing a bit, or you're retracting. So just try and get those cases in. How my score roughly compared to PassMed? I'm going to be honest with you, I'd have to, let me see if I can check. My scores on PassMed normally don't actually reflect how I do. Let me see. I don't remember. I'm going to be honest. I'm the kind of person I never used to pay that much attention to my PassMed scores, because I usually I think, I don't know why, but I never look at them that much. I would have been a bit above average, but I think I did better on the actual exam than PassMed. Yeah, and that's me with most question banks. So, anything else? Anything anyone's got on the top of their head? What else is useful to know? Maybe I think basically it's a long challenge, the CST application. It's pretty tiring. The MSRA, it's literally just like the first step. Put some time into it, but don't get, I think, look, if you really want to get a CST programmer, you have one in mind that you want to get, put, as much effort as you can, try and get through each hurdle. And even once you've done the MSRA, already start thinking forward to interviews, what I'd say. So just treat it all as like, you want to try and do as best you can in every single station. Inevitably you won't, but you want to try. But inevitably it comes down, funnily enough, to the interview, mostly. Let me see, there's a message. How can you start preparing as a medical student for CST? Interesting one. How would you prepare CST applications? I would and I wouldn't, because you might go crazy, because the thing is they change it, and they change it so often that sometimes, I remember when I was in medical school, they had the MRCS was part of it. There was like distinction, there was your intercalated degree, now I've arrived here and it's like, it's MSRA, which we'd never heard of, which is a stupid exam actually. Sorry to say it, but it's like not very accurate. It's not very intellectually challenging. It's just a bit of an annoying exam. And then you've got this portfolio, which changed completely as well in the interview. You might lose your, love for surgery. The only thing I would say, which is always going to be useful, my only advice is what will always be useful, like long term as a medical student, is probably log the procedures you're in. There's no harm with that. Just like log them, because it adds up, and all you need is about 50. And the second thing is, if you can do something like a publication or first author publication, that will always be useful in your career. So that I'd also recommend. Oh, and then the final thing is actually probably just like learn to know like some people in the application process, some of the specialty that you want to do. I say that because the other funny thing that you get when you get through this whole process and you have to rank all of the programs, and I want to do plastic surgery, so that's what I've got, plastics themed. But I actually didn't know I was going to do it until like a year before I applied. Or pretty much in the year that I applied, I kind of decided it. And the funny thing is actually when I learnt everyone in the plastic surgery department, when I met them, you get some really good insights about where is a good hospital to do it, because you can get a great score, but if you don't know anything about the department, even in London, there's some ones that you really want to avoid, and there are ones that are really good. So, for your purposes, so you kind of, you kind of have to just make some friends who are going to help you.
I guess from that, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Following on from that, I am 1 year younger academically than Carl, because I'm just an F2, and I am in the process of applying, and I have found myself at multiple stages looking at things I had done to get into CST as a medical student that are now not counting anymore. For example, I did the PG cert, and this year it's not counted anymore in the portfolio bit of things. But as long as you approach something for the sake of learning and for the sake of experience, then it will never be a wasted opportunity. There's always a way to talk about projects or particular degrees that you've done in your interview, or they will be helpful later on. But at the same time, don't feel like you have to personally invest a lot of time and money if you're not sure that something is not necessarily gonna count. So if you're happy to do it, even though it wouldn't give you points, then I say go for it, because you never know how the application system changes from one thing to the other, from 1 year to the other. However, as Carl was saying, operative experience, surgical experience, whether that's a rotation in foundation year or a surgical elective, doing some teaching, a form of audit and QI, it's roughly always asking you similar things.
Yeah, that's true. Can you take this exam in med school? No, you can't. It's a ranking exam, so they want you to all take it at the same time so they can cut you off. They do that on purpose because there's just too many people to interview. It's kind of annoying. Don't get too, I know it's an exam, but like I've done a lot of exams and it's really not a challenging exam. So it's a bit of frustrating when you just have to get that. You have to do the question banks. I personally didn't use any others. How many months to revise? I was working full time pretty much when I did it. I never really thought of it as months. I just did it on and off for a few weeks, I'd say. I think some people say do months, and I think it really depends a bit on your experience level with exams. And as I said, personalize it. Do you normally do above average? Do you do below average? It's the same content. Like we've all seen it before. This, ciprofloxacin. That's kind of how I felt about it. I've done enough exams that I knew actually I'm familiar with most of these questions by now, weirdly enough. So I didn't feel the need that I have to lock myself in a room and do this again and again and again. But yeah, look, you have to sit down a couple of afternoons. If you can start, soonish, I think I'd get the pass mode now. I'd start doing some questions, just get yourself in that zone. Take some time to build up the speed. I find you can't just get it 1st of November, sit down and do it in a week. You just need to start building it. So I think now is a good time to maybe get it and start doing just building that momentum, as it takes a bit of time. Anything else?
I can't see anything else in the chat, but I can do some public announcements just to see if anyone else answers any questions. So first of all, thank you so much, guys, for attending. Your feedback is really vital for us because it helps us shape whatever content we deliver next. So I have sent an automatic reminder for everyone to do the feedback. It's also really important for our speakers. It's fundamental for us to keep this free, but at the same time, they should get something in return. And your lovely feedback about how helpful they were definitely goes a long way. Second of all, we will be doing 3 more webinars, and they all take place in October. You can find more information on our Instagram or on our Linktree. We will be talking to you about portfolio, how to accrue points for that, and how to upload the evidence for that, as well as the recent changes that impact our application cycle. So that's not necessarily too relevant for medical students, but it can still be helpful to know, what you should get involved with. We will talk about interviews, and we will also talk about how to rank jobs, accept jobs, and upgrade your jobs all through the platform. So all of these will take place in October, and take your eyes peeled for that. And lastly, we will be recruiting for our own UK Plastics Research Committee, which is a great way to show that you're committed to, plastic surgery or surgical training in general in future applications, as some members of our team are now in ST3, and, they're moving on to more advanced workshops or webinars for people at their stage. So if you're interested in that at all, do drop us a message on Instagram, and we will be able to share with you our application form.
Let me just answer Bryant's question. Sorry, unless you had something else, Anna. Yes, your last supervisor surgeon usually can validate it. That's fine, and they can validate things that you've done previously. They just put a signature on every page. If you have a nice person, they normally do that. And it won't work as well if you've never operated with them. So you kind of have to align it that you get try and have done a surgical rotation, ideally in F1 or start of F2. So you've got somebody or know a surgeon because, from med school, because they need to sign you off. So you can't just never have done a surgical rotation. It's 3 years since med school. You're in London. I just won't walk up to a surgeon and be like, can you sign this? It's unlikely to work. But almost everybody gets to know a surgeon at some point. Yeah, they can sign it off. What other question was there? Invited. Okay, how does it happen? You're invited because you've applied to CST in October, November, and you are then given the invite link. It's part of the process. So it doesn't just happen. You have to apply for CST and then you get the invite. Is it worth doing a master's degree with Dushi? No, if you're asking it like that, then my feeling is no, only in the sense of if you want to do a master's degree, definitely do a master's degree because it's going to add something to you. But I'm going to be honest, I feel like everything in the NHS takes way longer than it should. And sometimes, you kind of have to find, in my opinion, you have to find that balance of you just want to be done. And, master's degrees are not really going to make you a better surgeon. They might add something. It's tricky. You might also just implode because, master's degree, how fun is it? How expensive is it? That's my feeling. Yeah. So that's one. I would never say do it just for this. How does one set up a logbook or portfolio for the CST application? Go into e-logbook, and that is, you can use that for your entire surgical career. It's called e-logbook, and you just register, then you add the cases. Portfolio is just like a term for like all the things that you've done. You can see the portfolio requirements for the application, and then you can kind of just like take note. You just kind of upload it all when the time comes. They ask that for you. Yeah. And I think the last thing to say, just, with all this preparation, the annoying thing about this system is I don't think it's the fairest system in the world. I don't think it's the most meritocratic. So you might just go crazy because, I can imagine if I was in medical school and I was, doing all these exams, doing publication, getting a master's, all it came down to, I'm going to be honest with you, was the interview. And the interview had nothing to do with a master's or a PhD or anything. So you can imagine how frustrating it must be, if you've done all these things and you don't actually get a post. Do you know what I mean? So don't do that, is my feel. I'm not sure what the hub thing is. You just have to add them onto e-logbook. That's enough. Yeah, there's that link. Yeah, if they're on e-logbook, it's enough. They have to be assisted, not observed. Assisted or more. Right. Any questions? Good. Well, I hope this was useful. It will be more useful to people that are about to do the MSRA. Yeah. Last question. Is the ACF pathway just completely different for this? I have to think. I can't tell you with a certainty, Brian. It is and it isn't. I think ACF, the general consensus for ACF is the more publications, the better. Then, though, I've heard of people who get into a academic post after they're in CT. So sometimes there's an ST2 entry, but it's not like, but I think there is a separate ACF pathway, yeah. No, sorry, publication doesn't need to be surgical, yeah, exactly. If you have to pick a registered specialty, just choose whatever specialty you're doing most commonly at the moment. It just helps you add the stuff. It just defaults your procedures list. Okay. Yes, join in for that on the 11th. That'll be good. Good. Yeah, that's probably it. Just, yeah, focus on, just do it one step at a time. Don't plan too many years in advance. Just do kind of within reason, because you might just end up hating what you're doing. So that's what I found, at least. I didn't try and do it too much in advance. Cool then. Thanks. Good luck with your applications, and hopefully you guys can enjoy the next talk. Thanks.